with that empty chair where he sat for more than a decade.
The Pulitzer Prize winner, a best-selling author, inspiring millions with his insights and wisdom across the political spectrum. You got Vice President Mike Pence weighing in already. Charles Krauthammer, he tweets, will long be remembered for his eloquence, his triumph in hardship, and his countless contributions to American political thought. Karen and I send our condolences, prayers to his family and friends during this difficult time.
Former President George W. Bush issuing a statement saying, quote, Laura and I are deeply saddened by the loss of an intellectual giant and dear friend, Charles Krauthammer. For decades, Charles's words have strengthened our democracy. His words were far-reaching and influential. And while his voice will be deeply missed, his ideas and values will always be a part of our country.
Charles Krauthammer leaves behind his beloved wife, Robin, of more than 40 years, and his son, Daniel. He was 68 years old.
You know, so many times you write a book, and when the book comes out, you want it to be successful. For us, I think we benefited the most when he wrote his book. Because we got a chance to see him countless times, because the book stayed #1, top 3. So he's like, I'm going to keep this going.
Right.
So he came back and forth, which wasn't easy. Number of times, we had a chance to interview him at length, talk to him for a long time, and we got to see what the D.C. Bureau saw on a daily basis. His insight, his kindness, and his intellect.
All these pictures were taken at a book signing or a book party that we had here at Fox for him, just to congratulate him on the success. The book is called The Things That Matter, 3 Decades of Passions, Pastimes, and Politics. Just the title alone is wonderful. The Things That Matter. I'm sure it will hit the charts again. It was on the New York Times bestseller list for 10 weeks. Actually, it was on the list for 40 weeks. It was #1 for 10 weeks.
It sold a lot because people loved what he had to write. We love to have
congratulate him on the success.
And
the book is called The
Thing. Just a little bit of him with us on this day after he died. Charles Krauthammer, get his book. It's fantastic. I read it twice.
I write in the book, one of the reasons why I shifted is because on foreign policy, the Democrats changed, I didn't. They don't want targeted solutions. They want to take stuff over. Congratulations on your book.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Challenging me right up there.
I am not challenging you.
If you're a columnist, you get graded on the curve. But selling books, they keep score. You get numbers every day.
You love it.
It's like a basketball game. You know, I'm in the corner, the clock is running down, and I go for the three-point shot.
Charles Krauthammer, thanks so much. We went right to all your areas of expertise.
Yeah.
Rarely been done before.
Except baseball.
In the letter that he issued a few weeks ago, or I guess it was probably 2 weeks ago, right? He said he leaves life with no regrets, sad to leave this life, but leaves with knowledge that he lived the life that he intended, grateful to play a role in conversations that have helped shape this nation.
And a typical Charles Krauthammer answer to a common question. People would say, so how do you become a columnist? And he'd go, well, first you go to medical school, which he did.
Good luck.
And he was great. And in those, you know, we all got to interview him, and I've got to admit, even though we've done this for a very long time, he is one of the few people who, when you are going to ask him a question, you are worried whether or not it's a good question.
That's right.
Because you think
so brilliant.
He's going to think that's a dumb question.
Right.
But you know what? At the end of the interview, he was always so polite and so kind, and whatever we asked, he loved to answer.
He had an older brother that he was with constantly, he said. He said his dad wouldn't take second best. He wanted him to learn everything that he could. And he said the first time he did a TV interview, his dad called him afterwards and he said, well done, son, you did great, but why didn't they call you doctor? Because you went to medical school. You earned that title. I guess they called him Mr. Krauthammer.
Yeah, and he said when he came out, it became clear to everybody that he was in a wheelchair. Most people did not know, including me for years, that he was, until I met him in person. And he said, you know, it was a tough decision when they did the hour special with Brett, because he said, I knew after that everyone would know. And for a while he went to great pains to make sure people just listened to who he, you know, what he was saying, not what he was going through since the age of 22.
Well, he said he was never going to let himself get down. He said, I knew instantly as soon as I hit the bottom of that swimming pool that I was going to be paralyzed. And he said, I made a decision. I'm not an emotional person. I remember him saying that in that special that he did with Brett. He said, I'm not an emotional person. I just said, I've got to move forward. I'm not going to have a victim mentality, and I'm just going to get my work done.
And he was paralyzed from the neck down, spent his entire life in a wheelchair. And I remember outside a Washington Nationals game one night, walking up And suddenly this van zooms by, had to step back, and said to Peter Doocy, "Who was that?" And he goes, "That was Charles Krauthammer. He just about ran over us." He didn't really about run over us, but a lot of people didn't realize that he could drive, and he drove all over.
He loved the Nationals. They remembered him at the park yesterday.
Yeah.
After he passed away.
With a moment of silence.
He ended up marrying the love of his life. He met her in Oxford. He got accepted into Harvard Medical School. He said, you know, I'm going to defer for a while. He went over the pond and met his wife at Oxford. And they came back here and have a son.
That's right. And we've got a lot of the images from his life, and it was a great life. And we're going to share those with you in about 20 minutes.
And if Charles Krauthammer was on our couch, he'd be talking about immigration and the showdown on our nation's capital, not only politically, but what's happening on our border. The House postponing a critical vote on immigration and the compromise bill. First it was till today, and now it's till next week.
That is the First Lady made a surprise visit to a detention center for migrant children down in Texas.
That's where Griff Jenkins joins us live from with the very latest down in McAllen. Hey, Griff.
Good morning, guys. Yeah, the First Lady braved really vicious storms down here. They continue today to be with the migrant children in the shelter behind me. She came with the HHS secretary, and she met with not only the children, but also the staff here. And here's what she had to say after that visit.
We all know they're here without their families. And I want to thank you for your hard work, your compassion, and your kindness you're giving them in this difficult time.
The weather prevented her from making a stop to visit the Border Patrol, but as she left, the media made much of a jacket she was wearing. It was a rain jacket that said, "I really don't care, do you?" on the back of it. But you know, after the visit, I was able to go inside this center and speak with Dr. Kurt Sinsky, who is the CEO of the shelter. Here's what he had to say about the First Lady's visit.
Yes, she wanted to learn all about New Hope Emergency Shelter, but more important, she wanted to spend time with the children. You could just see the joy on the children's faces. You could see the joy on Mrs. Trump's face, and it was very obvious to me that some real connections were made.
The visit comes, guys, as the Pentagon announces some 20,000 unaccompanied children will be housed at military bases at both in Texas as well as Arkansas, similar to a move that President Obama made in 2014 when he housed some 7,000 children in a similar manner. But that didn't stop Minority Leader Chuck Schumer from questioning the move. Take a listen.
The Department of Defense has been asked whether it can house 20,000 unaccompanied children between now and the end of the year. How will that work? President Trump hasn't taken care of the problem, not by any stretch of the imagination.
And then there's that GOP bill on immigration, which got pulled from the floor because they didn't have the votes. The compromise bill, as it was put forth by leadership, they're going to try and work out their differences over the weekend, perhaps, and bring it back for a vote next week, guys.
All right. Hey, Griff, when the First Lady was down at that facility, is that one of the rooms that has those chain link fence cages in them that were used as detention centers?
Not at all. The children are not in cages here at the shelter here. What has happened is once they've been processed, they're picked up because they've crossed illegally. Then they're put through the processing process. And then, according to their agreement with HHS, the children are cared for in centers like this. The First Lady wanting to make sure they were okay and wanting to spend some time to sort of connect with them, as you heard from Dr. Sinsky.
It sounds like she did go in and see the kids and maybe pick some up, but we just didn't see the video of that. Did they not allow cameras to see the kids, I guess, for they don't want to be identified?
That's right, Ainsley. They're not allowing cameras inside, but we were told about a conversation the First Lady had with some of the children in the classroom. She was talking to a group of boys, and she said, be nice to each other, be kind to each other. And, of course, you saw in that clip with Dr. Sinsky an American flag that children made for her visit. They were very excited that she was here.
All right, Griff, nice. Hope the weather clears up for you. Thanks, doing a great job telling us the real story of the border. So back in Washington, there were two bills. The Goodlatte-McCall bill, there's not many people thought would pass, but it got 194 votes, which surprised some. And then the compromise bill had trouble. Why? A lot of the members were saying, I am not sure what is in it.
Right.
Can we get clear on that? So they said, all right, let's just vote on this Friday. And then they said, well, wait a second. We got so many questions. Let's just vote on it next week. So the so-called compromise bill voted on next week.
That's exactly right. And I understand that the night before last, at 10 o'clock at night, somebody realized, hey, we made a typo. Remember, the bill had, I told Ainsley about this yesterday, the bill had $25 billion for the wall, right? Somebody accidentally made it $125 billion for the wall. So they had to go back and redo the bill. It just goes to show you portions of it were put together quite quickly.
Right. It had DACA. It has DACA on it. It has keeping the visa levels at the same rate, the immigration levels at the same rate, and $25 billion in advance for border security funding. Not necessarily for the wall, but I think the president would take that. The question is, if it does get through the House next week, what chances have it in the Senate?
Right now, it does not have enough votes.
All right, let's hand it over to Jillian, who has some more headlines for us. Hey, Jillian.
That's right. Good Friday morning to you at home as well. Let's start with this story. A manhunt is underway for a man who threatened to put a bullet in the president's head. U.S. Marshals call Sean Christie a clear and present danger to law enforcement in Pennsylvania. His father called the Secret Service after he threatened the president on social media. He also said he would shoot anyone who tried to arrest him. Christie has a history of threatening government officials, including former Alaska Governor Sarah Palin. 25 embassy workers have now been sickened in mysterious health incidents in Cuba. The State Department confirming the latest patient was recently evacuated from the country. Those workers reporting symptoms similar to those from concussions or brain injuries. One U.S. consulate worker in China has been sickened, and more are being tested. An investigation into the incidents is underway. Cuba has denied any involvement. The wife of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu fighting back against fraud charges. She is accused of misusing over $100,000 in official funds to pay for meals at the prime minister's residence. Yesterday, we told you she was arrested. She was not. She denies any wrongdoing. Her attorneys call the charges, quote, baseless and delusional. We're getting one step closer to a formal sit-down between President Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin. National Security Advisor John Bolton heading to Moscow next week to start preparing for the potential meeting. The two presidents met during summits in 2017, but this would be their first standalone meeting. It could happen as soon as July, possibly in Austria. It would be around the time President Trump attends the annual NATO summit, and we will certainly keep you posted on that, guys.
One huge story after another.
Yep.
It's incredible.
Never ends.
Thanks, Jillian.
Thank you. All right, straight ahead on this Friday, we are remembering the life and times of Charles Krauthammer with the people who knew him best. Charlie Hurt sat next to him on the panel for a long time. He's going to join us to honor Charles's memory next.
My job to call a folly. You're betraying your whole life if you don't say what you think, and you don't say it honestly and bluntly.
You see with the people who knew and worked with him all the time.
Now, one of them is Washington Times opinion editor, Fox News contributor, a common side on our channel, Charles Hurt. He joins us now. Charles, this is so odd. Not only do you lose Charles Krauthammer, his influence, we lost him for a year, couldn't wait for him to come back because he had a series of medical challenges. And then we get that letter last week. And it's just so him, the way he said it. I lived the life I intended. I mean, we all hope to get to that point when we get to that point, right?
Yeah, and absolutely, Brian. And that note, it was the thing about it that was so Charles was how direct it was.
Right.
It was so clear, and he didn't want to leave in any ambiguity about anything. It was just absolutely, perfectly crystal clear, just like every single one of his arguments, every one of the points that he ever made on the special report panel or anywhere else on TV, or in his columns. Oh my goodness, the columns! I think about being a young boy growing up in a small town in Southern Virginia. We got newspapers. We got the Washington Post. The number of times my father would rip out a column by Charles Krauthammer and send it to and give
Read
it to
this,
me.
Charlie.
Yeah, exactly. Or send it to me in college, and that was what. And it was funny. Years later, when I think it was the special that Bret Baier did about him. That was the thing. Charles's greatest goal was to write columns that parents would rip out of the paper and send to their kids in college.
Mission
and it was so powerful.
So
yeah,
what was
exactly.
that? What was that like, Charles? When you, what was that like when you're sitting next to him? You're like, my dad used to send your articles to me in college.
Oh, it was incredible, and you know, I would almost have to plug my ears so that I wouldn't just repeat whatever it was that he said, because whatever he said was just golden, and you couldn't be improved upon. And Lord knows, you could never disagree with him because of who he was and how he put things.
You would look right over there, and there would be one of those faces from Mount Rushmore sitting right next to me. Charlie, the thing about him and his political point of view, which is unique, though, is when he first went to Washington. He went during the Carter years. He wound up being a speechwriter for Democrat Vice President Walter Mondale, and eventually became one of the most prominent voices in conservative radio and television and writing.
Because he had a heart. And what was it that Winston Churchill said? If you're not liberal when you're young, you have no heart. And if you're not conservative when you get older, you have no brain. Well, that was Charles Krauthammer. You know, he had a giant heart. He was so generous. He was such a gentleman. But he was also, you know, an undeniable intellect. And the thing that I love the most about him is you know, with his book, the title was Things That Matter. And if you could say anything about him, his greatest wisdom was, whether it's politics or in life, Charles Krauthammer understood the things that mattered. Right. And that was what made it so powerful. And obviously, you know, we're all sad, and we will all miss him. But I think the greatest thing that you could do to celebrate Charles's life today would be to get his book and read it. There's some amazing columns in there. But then go to a baseball game.
Indeed.
Well, you have a wonderful name, Charles Hurt.
I'm lucky.
A name to live up to.
Thank you, Charlie.
Thank you so much.
All right. Meanwhile, we move ahead. President Trump blasting Democrats for not supporting Republican immigration bills, saying Dems, quote, won't vote for anything.
Mark Levin says Congress shouldn't be compromising our national security, and he's up next.
This program is brought to you by...
We have some quick headlines for you. If you want to eat, you have to work. That's according to the Farm Bill. It just passed the House. If it goes into law, it would require food stamp recipients to look for a job or work at least 20 hours a week. It would also set food and farm policies for the next 5 years. It now moves to the Senate. Meanwhile, another piece of legislation would keep President Trump off the 2020 ballot unless he releases his tax returns. The Rhode Island State Senate passing that bill this week. The president says he cannot release his tax returns because he's under an audit. The bill now heads to the State House. Brian?
It's time for the top moment of the week, arguably. Life, Liberty, and Levin is at 10 o'clock Sunday, but until you get to that show, you have Mark Levin on our show. Mark, I don't know if you heard, but the #1 topic this week has been immigration. So what's your thought on the compromise bill? From what you know, it seems like there's chaos reigning in Capitol Hill.
You know, I don't understand these compromise bills. We have to compromise in order to secure the border. Have you ever heard anything like that in your life? It's a national security issue. It's a public health issue. These people are coming to America because we treat them well. But they're not coming through the legal ports of entry. They're going around them in order to skirt the law. So our law enforcement says we have to figure out who these adults are. Maybe that little girl that guy's dragging across the border, maybe that's not his little girl. So we have to figure all these things out thousands of times a day with tens of thousands of people, and somehow America sucks. I don't buy into that.
Okay, people say don't separate women and children. I get that. So now the president signs the executive order. We're going to keep them together. Then they say it's not right to keep them together in a holding area. So what is the answer? Just letting them out, giving them a court date, and giving them a path to citizenship? Is that fair to everybody else that's doing it the right way?
Look, I want to get very serious about this. When is the last time the Democrat Party or their media mouthpieces proposed anything about securing the border? Kudos to the President of the United States. He comes into office, he sees a problem. Clinton, the Democrats, they have this 1997 consent decree with a liberal judge in the liberal Ninth Circuit, and the judge says you cannot keep these illegal alien kids more than 20 days in detention. And Democrats running around say there is no such law. Well, of course there is. There's a consent decree. So the president signs an executive order which the left immediately says it's going to challenge, and probably successfully. Why? because the ultimate goal is open borders and to let these people in illegally.
There's a theory out there, and the president presented it in his rally this week in Minnesota. He said, you know, the economy's doing exceedingly well. The North Korea summit's grading very high. So he's on a bit of a roll. And the IG report, the Russian investigation, has hit a pothole for Democrats. And now the exposure of that 514-page Michael Horowitz report under questioning is really exposing maybe a master plot. Everything that he indicated earlier seems to be coming out. At the very least, a lot of controversy. He believes that's why this immigration debate raged. Do you see a connection or a coincidence?
I absolutely do. The timing is not coincidental. It's intentional. Look, if the Democrat Party and the media in this country cared about this issue so much, why did they ignore it for 10 years? Why did they ignore it under Barack Obama? Why did they ignore it under Bill Clinton? Why did they ignore it under George W. Bush? And so when you bring this up, what the media say is, well, wait a minute. They weren't fully enforcing the law like Donald Trump is fully enforcing the law. I don't even understand what that means.
Here we are looking at these hearings, and we're seeing the report, and we're seeing these questions. Why don't we know the names of these DOJ lawyers? Why don't we know the names of these FBI agents? What do you mean they're a witness number one, a client number two? Why is that? Well, Mark Meadows exposed 2 more names. We're about to get a couple more. Then the IG report reveals that Peter Strzok had a few text messages that talk about a master plot. What's going on here, Mark?
Tell you what's going on. The highest levels of the FBI was corrupted. I said it before. I may have said it here, Brian. Where are the pro-Trump texts? Where are the pro-Trump senior FBI agents? Where are the anti-Hillary texts? Where are the anti-Hillary senior FBI agents? There aren't any. And that should tell you everything you need to know.
Mark Levin, I'll be watching, all right? And hopefully you will not wear a tie, because I like that look in particular.
You can bet on that.
And I will. You just heard Mark Levin's take, but there's even more fallout from the IG report. By the way, you can watch him Sunday at 10. It's not good for the FBI. We're going to find out a lot more. Plus, Bret Baier looks back at the remarkable life of Charles Krauthammer as we remember our colleague this morning as he passed away yesterday.
Do you think you'll ever stop writing?
No, I intend to die at my desk.
Really?
I would like to. I'm not sure I can arrange it.
Today and all day, and for a long time, we're going to remember our friend and beloved Fox News commentator, Charles Krauthammer. He passed away after a long fight with cancer.
The Pulitzer Prize winner and best-selling author, inspiring millions of people with his insight and his wisdom across the political spectrum.
Special Report host Bret Baier shares this emotional tribute to his very good friend.
It's my job to call a folly a folly.
Charles Krauthammer, columnist, author, and Fox News commentator, lived his life telling others exactly what he thought.
You're betraying your whole life if you don't say what you think, and you don't say it honestly and bluntly.
It was that quality that brought Charles to Fox News
this emotional
during
tribute.
Bret Hume's tenure as anchor.
This is not a man designed for television. You look at him and say, this is not a potential TV star. In fact, he became a huge star, even I would almost say a mega star on this channel. And it was the sheer force of his intellect and the power of his thinking. And on top of that, there was a gentleness about him, personally, that if he disagreed with you, you never felt attacked. He just disagreed with you.
It was always unspoken on the panel that he was always the leader because of his delivery, his intellect.
Special Report stage manager Mary Pat Dennert was on set with Charles every night for years.
It was kind of an ongoing joke on the panel that Bret Baier has a signal when people need to wrap up. I give him 30, so Bret puts his arm out. And Charles was on the show forever, and we always laughed that I don't think he paid attention to that once. He had something to say, he was going to say it. No time constraints were going to control him on that.
Born in 1950s New York to Jewish parents who left World War II era Europe, Charles' father raised his son to value the pursuit of knowledge.
His motto for us was, I want you to know everything. I want you to learn everything. You don't have to do everything, but you got to know everything. He thought that was part of life.
The family lived in Montreal and summered at their cottage in Long Beach, New York.
It was a paradisiacal childhood. My brother and I were inseparable. He always insisted I be included, so I got used to being around the big boys and taking the slings and arrows, and that's how you get toughened up.
As a senior at McGill University in Canada, Krauthammer became captivated by political journalism. He applied to medical school to appease his family and was accepted to Harvard. But Krauthammer put off attending and enrolled at Oxford instead. It was there that he met fellow student from Australia, Robin Trethewey, who would later become his wife. Charles reversed course and headed back to the U.S. to attend Harvard.
Why did you choose psychiatry?
I was looking for something halfway between the reality of medicine and the elegance, if you like, of philosophy. So psychiatry was the obvious thing.
It was there that one unexpected moment, a tragic diving accident, changed Charles' life forever.
It just hit at precisely the angle where all the force was transmitted to one spot, and that is the cervical vertebra, which severed the spinal cord.
When did you realize that the accident was life-altering?
The second it happened.
Despite his permanent paralysis, Charles astounded his professors and classmates by graduating on time, near the top of his class. Ultimately, he decided the field wasn't for him, a career reversal he joked about on Fox decades later.
I'm a psychiatrist in remission, doing very well. I haven't had a relapse in 25 years.
In 1978, Krauthammer headed to Washington, D.C. for a government job.
I thought, once I'm in Washington, isn't that where they do politics? One thing will lead to another.
Robert encouraged him to follow his dreams, and he soon landed at the left-leaning New Republic magazine, just as the Reagan administration took office.
So help me God.
Krauthammer found himself agreeing with the new president and questioning his own feelings about the Democratic Party.
I ended up supporting just about every element of the Reagan foreign policy.
Months after Reagan's re-election, Krauthammer penned the phrase, "the Reagan Doctrine," in a provocative Time magazine column, and the name stuck.
He created the Reagan Doctrine. Nobody had heard of it. Charles put together a piece and dubbed it, and I've read it many times, and it just holds up so well. I think Charles discovered then that there really was a lot to Reagan.
But it would take years before Charles fully embraced domestic conservative ideals.
It took me about a decade. I was skeptical of tax cuts. I was skeptical of smaller government at the beginning. And then by the end of the 80s, I had begun to change.
In 1985, his son Daniel was born. And 2 years later, Charles won the biggest honor in journalism, the Pulitzer Prize. But it was the events of September 11, 2001, that brought a more forceful tone to his commentary and a regular spot on the special report panel. Over the years, Charles became an audience favorite.
The biggest error that we make is to lose the damn war because we refuse to recognize who the enemy is and what it requires. For God's sake, why do you have to talk about that? The mourning is over, the Shiva is done, and if you're a conservative, you should be optimistic. I think it'll snow in hell before the DOJ is going to go after her. We all were expecting it. It didn't happen. That was the dog that didn't bark.
Despite all of his accomplishments, awards, and high-profile endorsements, Krauthammer was always humble and at times uneasy with the influence his words held.
Now I think about it, and I find it worrisome. The reason is that when I was totally unknown, I could say anything I damn well pleased.
That included when his opinions reached presidents.
Read Charles Krauthammer's column in the Post. He's a brilliant man.
Well, when you get praise from President Clinton and you're from my side of the aisle, that means that my career's done. I mean, I'm toast.
Krauthammer's high standards for political leaders were bipartisan. For President Obama,
well, I think he's done just about everything wrong.
to then candidate Donald Trump.
This is the strongest field of Republican candidates in 35 years. You could pick a dozen of them at random and have the strongest cabinet America's had in our lifetime. And instead, all our time is spent discussing this rodeo clown. I don't think I've ever heard such a stream of disconnected ideas since I quit psychiatry 30 years ago.
As far as Charles Krauthammer, I'm not a fan of his. I think he's a highly overrated pundit. He's wrong on so many things.
Charles Krauthammer, who, by the way, in Canada Casino put his first money on.
I saw that. I couldn't believe it.
Did you see that?
Thank you, Charles. I'm going to make you look good, Charles.
In recent years, as a Republican administration took office, Charles didn't shy away from his trademark, blunt, unabashedly critical analysis when it came to President Trump.
Presidents don't talk like this. They never have. This is what it sounds like when you're living in a banana republic.
Charles had other loves aside from politics. He played chess and was an avid baseball fan.
I grew up playing the game. I love to play the game.
And loved nothing more than seeing his Washington Nationals play and win.
Know the glory. You know, and with the White House on fire, the Congress in chaos, and the world going to hell in a handbasket, we need happy news like this. This is why God created baseball late on the 6th day.
Friends at Fox News Channel remember that quick wit and Charles' love for talking to anyone.
Special Report has a lot of people that come in and watch it, and they were always in awe of Charles and always very, apprehensive about approaching him. And I would always say, please go say something to him. He would love to talk to you, and he was always so friendly to everyone.
In 2013, Krauthammer released a book, Things That Matter, and summed up the survivor's spirit that has guided much of his life, writing, quote, "The catastrophe that awaits everyone from a single false move, wrong turn, fatal encounter. Every life has such a moment. What distinguishes us is whether and how we ever come back."
There's an element of that in everybody's story, their low point. Do you want it enough, and are you lucky enough? That's a part of it, too.
In mid-June, Krauthammer announced that he'd been diagnosed with cancer, and doctors had given him just weeks to live, writing, "I leave this life with no regrets. It was a wonderful life, full and complete, with the great loves and great endeavors that make it worth living. I am sad to leave, but I leave with the knowledge that I lived the life that I intended."
Do you think you'll ever stop writing?
No, I intend to die at my desk.
Really?
I would like to. I'm not sure I can arrange it.
Charles Krauthammer was 68 years old.
What a life. And what a treasure to be able to have those moving pictures of him as a little boy growing up.
I know. What a bright man.
Tonight at 9 o'clock, you'll see an hour special like no other on Charles's life leading up to the release of his book, which really applies here. And you realize how much you miss his commentary on what we're going through on a daily basis. You always think to yourself, what would Charles think? And I think that when he thought in terms of the president, when he thought the president was right, he'd comment. And when he thought he wasn't, he wouldn't be afraid to comment and get blasted in return. He kind of liked it.
Well, we've heard from so many of you asking where he is over the last year. I know there's people on my parents' street that always ask me when I go home, where is Charles? And he was diagnosed with cancer about a year ago and had so many complications after that surgery, after they removed the tumor. And it was in his abdomen. And then he had lots of complications, looked like he was getting better. And then the cancer a few weeks ago returned, and doctors said, you don't have long to live. And that's when he penned the letter.
A sad end, but what a full life. Charles Krauthammer was 68.
Rest in peace, our friend.
Good morning to you. Welcome back. We have some quick headlines now. A convicted cop killer will soon walk free. Robert Hayes is getting parole after serving 44 years behind bars. According to the New York Post, he could be released as early as July 24th. Hayes shot and killed Sidney Thompson, a transit patrolman, in 1973. The officer and father of two was trying to arrest him for jumping a turnstile. This comes just 2 months after another cop killer, Herman Bell, got parole in New York. Both men, members of the Black Liberation Army. Troopers save a man trapped in a burning car after it explodes. Look at this. Body cameras rolling as 1,000 rounds of ammo go off inside the vehicle. The Nevada Highway Patrol troopers pulling the driver to safety. He is expected to be okay. Let's look at your headlines. Steve, I'll send it to you.
Thank you very much, Jillian. New fallout from that recently released Inspector General report causing a ripple effect inside the FBI. Embattled anti-Trump FBI agent, that guy right there, Peter Strzok, who texted that he would stop Donald Trump from becoming president, apparently has lost his security clearance. This, as we learned that 3 of the 5 FBI officials targeted for anti-Trump bias were all part of the Mueller probe. What? Here with the reaction, founder and executive director of Turning Point USA, Charlie Kirk. Charlie, not surprising that Peter Strzok would lose his security council. I mean, he was escorted out of the building a couple of days ago.
Well, why hasn't he lost his job? I mean, so they say that's a big deal that he lost his security clearance. I mean, he should have been fired instantaneously when this stuff came out. But this just goes to show that there is an unelected, unknown, a group of bureaucrats at a very, very high level of government agencies that have unlimited political power. And what if we wouldn't have unearthed these documents? What if, the heroes in Congress, such as Devin Nunes or Mark Meadows, wouldn't have went through this unbelievable effort to get these documents? This all just would have been labeled a conspiracy theory.
So we know about 5 employees at the FBI had these anti-Trump texts, but how many others are there? They just didn't catch.
Well, right, and how much other behavior is there that any logical conclusion can say there was probably deleted documents and reappropriated assignments that went against this president time and time again, and this should exonerate the president completely when it comes to the Mueller probe. Because remember, this is the very institution that started the entire fake dossier that ended up launching this investigation.
And Charlie, the fact that Rod Rosenstein will not release the stuff that Congress wants to see, just so they can figure out why did this get started in the beginning? Because it does look to many on the political right, and you mentioned a couple of names that have been at the forefront of this, it looks like the FBI has redacted a bunch of stuff because it makes them look bad. They're not going to hand them over the documents because it started on a flimsy premise.
No one should be above the law. And what you're seeing here is you see a level of government bureaucrats and agents that allow their political bias to get directly into their work. And then when they get challenged, they say, how dare you challenge our work or the integrity of the FBI? The thing that I found most disgusting about the IG report was the one sentence, after all these findings, the integrity of the FBI is still intact. Are you kidding me? You received gifts in exchange with reporters. There, you have text messages of senior level FBI agents saying, no, don't worry, we'll stop it. And the integrity of the FBI is still intact? I don't think so. And the President of the United States was correct in firing Comey last spring, and this Mueller investigation should be ended completely and totally.
All right, Charlie Kirk, thank you very much. Have a good weekend. All right, straight ahead on this Friday, the First Lady making a surprise trip to the border, but the media focusing on that coat.
It was impossible to think that that is aimed at the people she just saw. It's more, I think, likely maybe the person who she's married to.
Well, Diamond and Silk have some thoughts about that. They join us live coming up late. Good morning to you, ladies. And it's Take Your Dog to Work Day, and Brian's dogs, Rocky and Apollo, are at work.
The party was nice, the party was bumping.
Good morning to you. Welcome back. We have some quick headlines now. A convicted cop killer will soon walk free. Robert Hayes is getting parole after serving 44 years behind bars. According to the New York Post, he could be released as early as July 24th. Hayes shot and killed Sidney Thompson, a transit patrolman, in 1973. The officer and father of 2 was trying to arrest him for jumping a turnstile. This comes just 2 months after another cop killer, Herman Bell, got parole in New York. Both men, members of the Black Liberation Army. Troopers save a man trapped in a burning car after it explodes. Look at this. Body cameras rolling as 1,000 rounds of ammo go off inside the vehicle. The Nevada Highway Patrol troopers pulling the driver to safety. He is expected to be okay. That's a look at your headlines. Steve, I'll send it to you.
Thank you very much, Jillian. New fallout from that recently released Inspector General report causing a ripple effect inside the FBI. Embattled anti-Trump FBI agent, that guy right there, Peter Strzok, who texted that he would stop Donald Trump from becoming president, apparently has lost his security clearance. This, as we learned that 3 of the 5 FBI officials targeted for anti-Trump bias were all part of the Mueller probe. What? Here with the reaction, founder and executive director of Turning Point USA, Charlie Kirk. Charlie, not surprising that Peter Strzok would lose his security council. I mean, he was escorted out of the building a couple of days ago.
Well, why hasn't he lost his job? I mean, so they say that's a big deal that he lost his security clearance. I mean, he should have been fired instantaneously when this stuff came out. But this just goes to show that there is an unelected, unknown, a group of bureaucrats at a very, very high level of government agencies that have unlimited political power. And what if we wouldn't have unearthed these documents? What if, the heroes in Congress, such as Devin Nunes or Mark Meadows, wouldn't have went through this unbelievable effort to get these documents? This all just would have been labeled a conspiracy theory.
So we know about 5 employees at the FBI had these anti-Trump texts, but how many others are they? They just didn't catch.
Well, right, and how much other behavior is there that any logical conclusion can say there was probably deleted documents and reappropriated assignments that went against this president time and time again, and this should exonerate the president completely when it comes to the Mueller probe. Because remember, this is the very institution that started the entire fake dossier that ended up launching this investigation.
And Charlie, the fact that Rod Rosenstein will not release the stuff that Congress wants to see, just so they can figure out why did this get started in the beginning? Because it does look to many on the political right, and you mentioned a couple of names that have been at the forefront of this. It looks like the FBI has redacted a bunch of stuff because it makes them look bad. They're not going to hand them over the documents because it started on a flimsy premise.
No one should be above the law. And what you're seeing here is you see a level of government bureaucrats and agents that allow their political bias to get directly into their work. And then when they get challenged, they say, how dare you challenge our work or the integrity of the FBI? The thing that I found most disgusting about the IG report was the one sentence, after all these findings, the integrity of the FBI is still intact. Are you kidding me? You received gifts in exchange with reporters. You have text messages of senior level FBI agents saying, no, don't worry, we'll stop it. And the integrity of the FBI is still intact? I don't think so. And the President of the United States was correct in firing Comey last spring, and this Mueller investigation should be ended completely and totally.
All right, Charlie Kirk, thank you very much. Have a good weekend. All right, straight ahead on this Friday, the First Lady making a surprise trip to the border, but the media focusing on that coat.
It was impossible to think that that is aimed at the people she just saw. It's more, I think, likely maybe the person who she's married to.
Well, Diamond and Silk have some thoughts about that. They join us live coming up late. Good morning to you, ladies. And it's Take Your Dog to Work Day, and Brian's dogs, Rocky and Apollo, are at work.
The party was nice, the party was pumping.